It is a real pleasure to participate in the Valencia Battery Convention as part of eMobility World Congress. Many thanks to Eurobat, René Schröder, Alphonse Westgate and Pau Sanchez for the invitation. My apologies for not being able to physically be present with you today. Back in 2017, under the political entrepreneurship of Commission Vice President Šefčovič, we identified batteries as a strategic sector for our competitive sustainability. And we literally started from scratch, with almost no battery cells production in Europe. We were clearly moving into uncharted territory. I will not hide that when we wanted to launch the alliance at first, some governments were looking at us with bewilderment, to say the least. Not to mention a few OEMs who have since become major off-takers in so many innovative and scaling up projects. Since then, the European Battery Alliance has become a blueprint for our industrial policy. So much so, as a matter of fact, that it now acts as a model for other industrial alliances in the EU. Action speaks louder than words. The two battery-related important projects of common European interest, IPCIs as we call them, have involved some 60 companies from 12 member states with cutting-edge innovation at its core, underpinned by 6.1 billion euros in state aid and leveraging 14 billion euros in private investment. In 2022, the total investment in Europe's battery ecosystem is over 160 industrial projects along the entire value chain, past 180 billion euros. By the end of last year, Europe had reached already 70 gigawatt of installed battery capacity, with 30 announced lithium-ion gigafactories. The confirmed Volkswagen SEAT gigafactories in Sagunt, close to Valencia, is a case in point. Even a reference that we will be following very closely from the European Commission. We have also launched battery academies in a handful of member states, starting with Spain, with the overall capacity to reskill 50,000 workers by 2023 and 100,000 workers by 2025 to help meet demand as the industry expands. The EU legislator has in record time reached a political agreement on the batteries regulation with sustainability requirements that you will have covered in the first panel, I'm sure. There are all those sustainability requirements at the core of our competitive advantage. So we are moving very fast and together. Thanks to InnoEnergy, and I pay tribute to their work, we have pulled an ecosystem of more than 800 stakeholders. For the leadership can only be that of the industry itself. We were not a first mover, but we are potentially gearing towards a front runner. Europe is becoming a leading hotspot for investment and scaling up, overcoming the traditionally strenuous valley of death, which is the broader ambition we now have with a Net Zero Industry Act for all net zero technologies. To keep this leadership alive and kicking, we need to step up our game, especially in the face of the Inflation Reduction Act and the risk of investment leaks and acute disruption or shortages, as we were made aware or is made visible in the pandemic or Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, all acting as magnifying glasses on our strategic dependency or vulnerabilities. We thus have a number of significant challenges ahead of us. First, talking about the Inflation Reduction Act, the battery sector will undoubtedly be one of the most affected, with the US granting substantial subsidies for domestic battery manufacturing and tax credit for buying electric vehicles containing batteries manufactured in the US. Second challenge, coming back to our workforce, we estimate that we need an additional 800,000 skilled workers by 2025. Third challenge, we are in dire straits when it comes to the extraction, refining and even recycling of critical raw materials, both upstream and downstream the value chain. Upstream, Europe is only responsible for 1% of global production of key battery raw materials. We are nowhere on the refining, having to ship rare earths or lithium to China, for instance. And downstream, we hardly recycle, recover or reuse raw materials, or only starting to do so. So a lot of work is needed. Also considering many suppliers countries of raw materials have imposed export restriction on as much as 70% of global production of cobalt, rare earths and tungsten. If we do nothing on this front, we will find ourselves in a similar dependency scenario vis-à-vis single suppliers to the one we unfortunately have inherited on fossil fuels. Except that this time, it is our leadership in the twin green and digital transition that is at stake. So to put it bluntly, doing nothing equals to both deindustrializing Europe and giving up on our sustainability-based strategic autonomy. Therefore, we have committed to gearing up with a Green Deal industrial plan and the package adopted last week, the Net Zero Industry Act and the Critical Raw Materials Act, amongst others. In a nutshell, we intensify our work to not only blend our considerable EU funding, but also to crowd in more private investment into the rollout of strategic projects. Also working with Member States and the European Investment Bank. We also ramp up skilled workforce and deploy training programs, not only through the generalization of EBA academies, but also more widely for net zero industry academies. We will step up our work to set clear 2030 benchmark throughout the critical raw material value chain, to simplify the permitting of strategic projects, to stress test strategic supply chain related to critical raw material, to ensure coordinated stockpiles and other diversification strategies, and last but not least, to leverage green public procurement. Finally, we are intensifying our work with the US to create a level playing field that builds technological bridges, not barriers, between the two shores of the Atlantic. And building up smart partnership with more partners such as Norway, Canada, Ukraine, but also Western Balkans, Africa, Latin America, and Australia. Bottom line, we are joining forces across the board, both internally through the Net Zero Europe platform and externally through the Critical Raw Materials Club that I have just described. And also here at the Valencia Battery Convention, where key players of the EU battery ecosystem are really joining forces. This is why your discussions and contributions today are so timely and important. Thank you.